I'm Terry Little, a senior lecturer in the Department of Archaeology and Heritage Studies and research coordinator for the Institute for Development Research and Training at Ahmadu Bello University in Zaria, Nigeria. As a university is one of 55 institutional partners in this initiative, I'm pleased to greet you on behalf of our Vice Chancellor, Professor Kabir Bala. I'm co-moderating the session with Estelle de Bruyn of the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage, who will introduce herself in a few minutes. The title given to this panel is Culture in the Support of Carbon Budgets, which honestly is not a very friendly name for a panel discussion. If you want to learn more about what a carbon budget means and why it is important, I suggest you watch a 6-minute YouTube presentation by the young Swedish environmental activist Greta Thunberg, who does the carbon math and reminds us that the numbers associated with our carbon emission are not an opinion. This is science. An inconvenient truth, as highlighted by the 2006 documentary featuring the efforts by Al Gore to raise awareness about global warming. The heritage sector in which most of us attending this conference work is a guilty party to this truth. It should come as no surprise that our activities in creating, protecting, conserving, and using heritage can, and sometimes do, result in carbon emissions and the unsustainable use of precious resources. It is for this reason that I'm pleased that the conference organizers included this topic in the program. Emitting less carbon is essential to slowing the progress of climate change and the calamities associated with it. In Africa, where I'm speaking from, the continent accounts for the smallest share of greenhouse gas emissions at just 3.8%. Global warming is contributing to more and more extended heat waves, a tripling of droughts, quadrupling of storms, and a 10-fold increase in flooding since the 1970s, exacerbating security threats throughout the continent. This session shares a range of approaches for understanding and addressing the carbon footprint created by the heritage sector. Our panelists share their experiences and ideas with regard for the documentation and preservation of digital and contemporary heritage, innovative materials and building construction strategies using a case study route, the reduction in COVID,
Terry, I'm afraid that
to reducing heating, ventilation, and air conditioning systems, and the use of AI technology to monitor and protect heritage sites. As you watch and listen, we invite you to think of other examples of heritage support for addressing the carbon budget. As there will be very limited time at the end of the session for Q&A, we also invite you to use the chat function to raise questions for individual speakers who will be on hand to address them in the chat. Estelle, can I turn it over to you now?
Yes, thank you, Terry, for this very nice introduction. I'm Estelle de Bruyn from the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage in Belgium, and I'm the head of the Sustainability Unit. But we will go now to our panelists. The first one is Andreia Nogueira. She's assistant researcher at Tech and Art, Technology Restoration and Arts Enhancement Center in Portugal. She is currently engaged in critical and reflexive innovative work on the meaning and significance of our contemporary cultural heritage and on the articulation between sustainable development and creative conservation. Andreia, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I will share my screen with my presentation. I hope you are seeing now my part.
Yes.
Okay.
But can you put it on the larger display? Great.
Okay. So I'm very pleased to take part on this virtual conference because so I have to thank this unique opportunity to make my point shared with all of you. I'm not going to talk about the most common direct and environmental threats to cultural heritage, floods, fires, storms, and other weather-related hazards. So I will return to just a little bit. So as I was saying, floods, fires, storms, and other weather-related hazards are, as we all know, affecting the protection of cultural heritage. In the following minutes, I'm going rather to explore and present a different perspective based on how the digital transition that is currently being implemented and enforced has to help mitigating climate change and achieving the green transition is strengthening the future of our cultural heritage, particularly considering immaterial, intangible, and performance-based heritage, often dependent on the production of complex and vast amounts of documentation, increasingly in digital format, for their future communication, enhancement, and preservation. Hence the title of my communication, Documentation in the Digital Transition, What About Its Future Sustainability? Before entering into the heart of this question, I want to talk a little bit about the European policies and the way they are driven by carbon budgets has to reflect on their impact on cultural heritage protection. Very briefly, I just want to make the point that digital solutions are considered of the utmost importance to fighting climate change and achieving the green transition. The European Commission, for instance, is working on a digital transformation and hence investing significantly in digital skills for all Europeans. Actually, digital and environmental transitions are both top priorities for the European Commission as they go hand in hand. Our future will be defined by our success in meeting these two priorities, and the future of our cultural heritage will be dictated as well by today's policies and practices. It is therefore of our interest to investigate on whether these policies are suitable for the protection of our cultural heritage. Unfortunately, as I'm going to demonstrate, digital solutions currently in place are threatening the future of those cultural manifestations that are immaterial, intangible, or performance-based, and hence dependent on the production of documentation, mainly nowadays in digital format. With this comes the question, why is the digital transition threatening the future of our cultural heritage? On the one hand, because most of the digital content produced nowadays is in real danger of loss, due to the fact that successful and sustainable digital preservation strategies are not being accounted for, at least collectively, in the first place. And on the other hand, because the carbon footprint of current digital archiving is not that environmental friendly with a high consumption of energy. Considering the first point, I will dig into the question of the sustainability of the digital documentation produced in the context of contemporary art preservation practices. Has to make the point that part of the documentation produced for preservation purposes, which is to be available online, is starting to get lost, since digital online repositories are ceasing to be maintained after the end of their funding projects, and also because sustainable digital preservation strategies are not being implemented in the first place. I'm going to give the example of the Inside Installation Project, an extremely important project dedicated to the preservation and presentation of installation art, which took place between 2004 and 2007. 25 museums and institutions located in 6 European countries have been involved in this 3-year project, which was funded by the European Commission. 33 case studies of installation works of art, mostly dating from 1995 and 2005, have profoundly been researched, reinstalled, and documented, with their documentation being shared in digital format through the project's website. Unfortunately, if we click on the name of one of these case studies, the information cannot be retrieved anymore, as the page does not exist anymore. The Inside Installation Project's website is currently powered by the Wayback Machine, which is an initiative of the Internet Archive, a non-profit organization that is building a digital library of Internet sites and other cultural artifacts in the digital form. Its mission is to provide universal access to all knowledge, but as we can see here, we cannot have access anymore to most documentation used to be available at the Inside Installation website, even using this Wayback Machine. This example, I hope at least, will make ourselves more aware of the dangers of the digital transition, which are much more frightening for those works dependent on the production of documentation for their preservation. This is not the same as saying that this digital transition is not important, but the fact is that the digital content is prone to an early disappearance. And in relation to the safeguard of cultural property, we work with both eyes on the future. So it is not feasible to invest in practices that are not envisioned for the long term. Otherwise, our own work will be for nothing, and this is not a carbon neutral position, because we will have to repeat previous work with some luck, if possible yet. If not, cultural property will eventually and irremediably be lost. Considering the second point, it is quite recognized that the development of the World Wide Web, the emergence of social media and big data, along with increasing use of information and communication technologies, have led to a rising amount of data, which affects the environment because its energy consumption is growing exponentially. Departing from this backdrop, I'm taking into the discussion an often neglected aspect of digital archiving and preservation in cultural heritage studies. There is a new trend in producing NFTs for communication enhancement and preservation purposes. NFTs are non-fungible tokens. In other words, NFTs are digital assets that represent real-world objects like artworks, music, and other items, or even animals in the framework of wildlife conservation. They are bought and sold online, normally with cryptocurrency, and they are also generally encoded with blockchain technology. The Cinello company, for example, established a collaboration with several museums in Italy as to create digital representations of masterpieces. For each digital reproduction, an NFT token is created on blockchain. With the pandemic, when physical art events were on hiatus, NFTs has been soaring in popularity. There is, however, a climate controversy around NFTs, as they came with a serious environmental impact because of the nature of blockchain being something that requires huge amounts of energy to run computer systems to mine it. This discussion has, though, not been addressed, as far as I know, within the context of cultural heritage studies, not to mention the preservation itself of these non-fungible tokens yet to be addressed. Departing from the two examples that I brought to the fore, I'm in position to conclude that to think seriously about the digital transition and the way it impacts, one, the preservation of those artistic manifestations often dependent on the production of complex and vast amounts of digital data and documentation, two, the sustainability of the conservator's own work, and three, the climate change, is to get into the development of more efficient, sustainable, and carbon neutral digital archiving and preservation practices. Nevertheless, considering the difficulty in defining and creating such practices, this leads to the frightening reality that cultural and artistic heritage and related memories, documentation, or digital content or representations are in real danger of an increasingly accelerated pace towards its disappearance. something has to change. Our digital solutions, our own practices, by reducing, for instance, the amount of documentation produced or by relying solely on oral history. As I do not have the answers to these questions, the aim of my presentation is to open up a dialogue and foster an awareness on the need to reflect upon the digital transition and its impact on the protection of cultural heritage in the long term, so that we can effectively have culture in support of carbon budgets. To conclude, I just want to emphasize that there is a need to look into the dark side of the digital transition and to make society at large be aware of it. The effort has to be collective, and we have to be creative in finding more sustainable practices. Let's creativity openly enter into the conservation world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andreia, for this presentation, which stressed out a very challenging problematic linked to digital transition, indeed. Now I will introduce Deborah Briccola, our next speaker. She will talk about novel materials for blast and impact mitigation applications. Deborah is a civil engineer with a doctorate in structural, seismic, and geotechnical engineering. She is also an adjunct professor in structures and earthquake resistance criteria at Politecnico di Milano and at the University of Applied Science and Arts of Southern Switzerland. She's also, in 2020, she was awarded the Swiss Government Excellence Scholarship to study metaconcrete for innovative strategic mitigation purpose. We look forward to your talk, Deborah.
So thank you very much, Estelle and Terry, for the opportunity you gave me to deliver this speech, and good morning to everyone. So I'm going to share my, my screen and my presentation. So rather than an investigation, as it may look like from my title, my talk must be considered as a reflection on my role as a civil engineer with a passion for the built heritage. And actually, with this talk, I want to answer to this question: how can I be a player in the challenge of preserve culture while considering two boundary conditions that are climate change and worse? For those of you fond of maths, it is clear that the solution to a problem dramatically changes depending on the boundary conditions. That is to say that climate change and conflicts cannot be a priori ignored. During my talk, I'm going to talk about innovative materials, climate change, heritage protection, and conflict resilience. So the questions that I want to address are essentially two, and actually I want to understand what could be the connection between these four different topics and how different players and stakeholders can cooperate to provide, let's say, better solution. And to answer to this question, of course, I cannot forget my roots as a civil engineer, but I have also to look in perspective. And in particular, I have to cope these four topics here on the right side of the slide that directly strike and influence my work as a researcher every day, but that are topics that I did not have the chance to study during my bachelor and master, so topics towards which I developed a sensitivity just in the few years. So in this framework, what we're going to see this morning is simply the way in which the interconnection between these four topics appeared to me in my personal and small experience as a researcher and professional. So talking about innovative materials, I started working on them in 2015 at Caltech, where I really got fascinated by the topic of acoustic metamaterials. So material whose properties go beyond the one of common materials. And in particular, the point is that acoustic metamaterial deals with acoustic waves that are perturbation that change, of course, in time, propagates through space and carries energy at a specific frequency. So the focus when dealing with acoustic metamaterials is to try to inhibit sound transmission through the onset of band gaps. Engineers and material scientists nowadays can profit from computational methods and manufacturing techniques in order to engineering the microstructure of material to obtain such goals. So one possible solution is that to use locally resonant microstructure as the one that you can see here. And the point is that depending on the ratio between the natural frequency of this microstructure and the frequency of the impacted wave, this microstructure can oscillate in phase or out of phase with the loading, and this of course affect the dynamic mass of the element and the performance of the material with respect to dynamic waves. If now we want to apply the concept of metamaterials in the field of civil engineering, it is, let's say, quite easy to understand that one possibility is that to, let's say, substitute partially the traditional aggregates in gravels and stones by means of heavy spherical spheres coated by a compliant outer layer. Mitchell and Ortiz in 2014 developed the material and proved its soundness from a numerical point of view. I proved the soundness from an experimental point of view in the following years. Metaconcrete can be considered an acoustic metamaterial, dealing that it is able to provide a band gap at specific frequency, the one that you want to shield, by working on the geometry, the density and stiffness and material properties of the components of the aggregates. So it is a fully tailored material. But of course, metaconcrete is lies at the frontier between innovative and traditional materials in the way in which concrete is a traditional material for building, and it is not a mystery that the production of concrete, of course, causes a lot of CO2 emissions, which are really bad in terms of increase of temperature and, of course, of climate change. During the production of concrete, one of the worst steps in terms of CO2 emission is the production of clinker, which is a specific, let's say, component in the process of concrete. And actually, researchers are working in this for a direction to try to cope with this problem and to limit the CO2 emission. However, my point when dealing with metaconcrete was a bit different. So I did not, let's say, think about recycling, but for example, I resorted to the philosophy of reuse of waste, and I start to use as aggregates, engineered aggregates, old-fashioned mouse balls, as you can see here in the picture. And other possible alternatives in the future will be the use of demolition waste, plastic tars, and rubber scraps, of course, to provide the engineered aggregates. So here I have just addressed, let's say, 2 out of 4 of the topics that I want to talk about this morning. And now it comes maybe an inappropriate question. So is war over? So in the introduction, I talk about conflict resilience and not peace, because it is my own personal opinion that peace is for sure something that we need to try to obtain, but we can for sure develop a resilience towards conflict. So the answer to this question in the 60s by John Lennon and Yoko Ono were, in my opinion, a two-way optimistic answer. So something that you can have just in songs, while an updated answer to this question is provided by the map that you see here on the screen, where you can see the ongoing conflicts worldwide. And usually we are going to, let's say, link war to explosion, but explosion can occur also as in the form of accident, as the Beirut explosion in 2020 is demonstrated. So again, the point is that to develop a resilience towards conflict. Let's say maybe this is a sad point of view, but as a civil engineer, explosion can be seen and modeled as a blast wave whose properties depends on the equivalent TNT charge. So from my point of view, last year during the fellowship program that Estelle mentioned before, I developed the research where I tackled the response of metaconcrete to blast loading through computational and experimental methods, and the experimental tests were developed at the Dynamat Subsea Laboratory at the University of Applied Sciences and Arts of Southern Switzerland. So here the point, and we can see a small video, is that at a point after the forced microcracking, you see that the coating is reacting, and then here you see, and also in the video, the oscillation of the core inside the coating. So actually the material is going to behave as foreseen by numerical simulation. And the point is, okay, how now heritage protection come to play a role in this context. And the point is that heritage protection with respect to my research is both an aim and a trigger for improvements. So during the civil war in Lebanon, a lot of very large objects belonging to the cultural heritage were treated and then safeguarded by the use of concrete cases that you can see here during their demolishing. And this solution of concrete case enables us to have this masterpiece of art today. So the idea is to learn from the past to look forward. And for example, the material that I am studying as a civil engineer and that address in the way that we have seen the topic of climate change and conflict resilience can be, for example, a solution in this context. And similar one. So just to sum up, my reflection on the topic of climate, culture, and peace is the following one. So usually all of these kind of players that you see here are seen as a kind of opponents on the playground of activities. But in my opinion, in order to, let's say, provide a better future, the only way is to try to work in a team with the same kind of objective and profiting from each other's knowledge and expertise. So with this, I end my presentation, and I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you, Deborah. I really like is that you start from a process which is used as part of conflict resilience, and you try to find a way to make it more environmental friendly, still effective, efficient, in a creative way by using waste, for example. So now we will go to our next presenter, who is Sarah Coggins. Sarah works at the Mary Rose Trust as a conservation engineer, closely monitoring the environment and movement of the Tudor ship's hull. She has more recently worked for the Science Museum Group, and she's taking up a position at the National Gallery as a preventive conservation engineer. She has focused on environmental and physical monitoring and advocacy for preventive conservation in large organizations. Sarah, please go ahead.
Hello, thank you, Estelle. Let me get my screen up. Yeah, so thank you for the introduction. My name is Sarah Coggins, and I'm the conservation engineer at the Mary Rose Trust, which is in Portsmouth in England. And I hope in this presentation, I'll be able to show a real world example of the slow progress of investigation and incremental changes that have been vital for realistic climate action for an independent cultural heritage site. The Mary Rose was a ship that was built during the reign of Henry VIII for his navy. And it was launched in 1511 and fought in a number of battles until it sank in 1545. The hull of the ship was raised in 1982 from the seabed in the Solent, which is a small channel between the Isle of Wight and the mainland of England. And many of its contents were raised at the same time. And now the hull and the collection from the Mary Rose are on display. They've gone through a process of conservation, which means that the objects can be displayed safely. The hull had periods of being sprayed with filtered water and then with polyethylene glycol in different concentrations, and then a long period of drying. Wooden objects from the collection have been treated with polyethylene glycol as well, and then freeze dried, and metal objects were washed to remove sediment and then treated to remove chloride ions. And now the Mary Rose Museum, as it is now, is a purpose-built museum that houses the hull of the Mary Rose in one large space with a significant environmental control system. And there are also 5,000 objects that were collected from the wreck site, which are on display. And these contents are displayed in either the context gallery, which is opposite the ship, showing the relative positions of the objects where they were on the ship. And then at either end of the ship, there are smaller galleries with showcases. And these spaces also have their own self-contained environmental control system. The museum sits inside the Portsmouth Historic Dockyards, which belongs to the Navy. And so the Mary Rose leases the land from the Ministry of Defence, and our utilities are provided by the naval base. We have electricity and steam, which are metered. And then we have gas oil that was brought in directly by the trust. Our electricity is not from renewables at the moment, although the Navy is building a solar farm on an existing car park, and that's due to come online in the summer. So my role encompasses monitoring the environment of the ship hall, the context galleries, and the showcases, making sure the control is doing what it's supposed to do, which is to keep the objects within very close parameters. But I also look at how we can make these systems more sustainable. As a medium-sized independent museum, financial sustainability is also incredibly important for us. And now environmental sustainability is one of the Trust's key strategic objectives, and that only happened recently. And so making sure the museum is environmentally sustainable and reducing our environmental impact is something I feel very strongly about, as do many others who I work with. So we went through a period of extreme financial difficulty due to the lockdowns of 2020 and 2021. In normal years, around 90% of the museum's revenue comes from ticket and shop sales, and busy summer months made up for quieter winter ones. And looking at what our sort of budgets are, energy costs are a serious chunk of the museum's budget, and therefore have been looked at with some urgency. So the first steps that we've been taking is to understand how much energy we are using and where it's going. So my role started in August 2021, and this means that the Trust has been able to have someone looking at this for the first time. So we've been able to gather some really good information about the energy we use, which is a vital first step. But it has been difficult. We only have data going back to 2018. And also COVID has meant we've had unusual years, which makes comparison of energy use over the years quite difficult. And also looking at where the energy is going has been complicated. It's one building, but many of the systems contribute to different areas. We can't break it down by conservation or visitor services, for example. Once we looked at where energy was going, we started to try to make some changes. But these have been small and really quite basic. We implemented an adjustment of a step change for the valves in the HVAC system, which meant that the environment wasn't cycling quite so much. A slight increase in the time between heating and cooling meant that the system was not fighting itself, which meant a more stable environment, but also a reduction in energy use. The set point for the relative humidity in the ship hall, where the hull is, has been changed. When the building was commissioned, the system was set to aim at 54% relative humidity, plus or minus 4%. But this has been changed to a band of 50 to 58% RH. And that original set point was a miscommunication between engineers and conservation staff. And it's evident that a system fighting to remain at 54% will have to work harder than one aiming to achieve 50 to 58%. In August 2021, the temperature set point in the ship hall was raised from 19 degrees Celsius to 20 degrees Celsius. In the summer, the control system works very hard to cool the room. And because of how the HVAC system works, this introduces a higher RH, which then the system is fighting to lower as well. And so by accepting that the ship hall can be kept at 1 degree higher, we are reducing the need for cooling and dehumidification. And so I'm still in the process of assessing if these interventions have had an effect on our energy use. Overall, our electricity use is down since 2018, but last year was quite difficult to compare with. Yes, it's difficult to compare energy between 2021 and 2020, as there were 3 periods of lockdown when the museum was closed and a lot of systems were turned off anyway. So we're investigating a lot of changes that we could make. We're thinking about parameters, environmental parameters that we have for the hull and the collection. So at the moment, the hull is kept between 17 and 21 degrees Celsius and 48 to 62% relative humidity. And the showcase is the same, with the exception of one that has just metal objects. And you know, there's new protocols. The BIZOT protocol calls for wider parameters. And so we're investigating also whether we can turn off some temperature control systems in the showcases, as we have temperature control in the galleries around those showcases, which keep the area to a 17 to 25 degree centigrade band. And there is scope to use a passive controls such as silica gel. But we are in the process of investigating the air tightness of our showcases, as this has a bearing on whether mechanical or passive control is the best option. And we also have some energy clamps, which mean we can investigate how much energy each showcase system is using, which should be interesting. But also our showcases were provided by Raya, which is a German company. So if we can move away from those systems as well, because the servicing is provided from Germany, so there'll be a cost benefit and also less use of flying people over, so that has an effect as well. We have investigated solar panels, and these could provide up to 16% of the museum's energy. However, the building has a curved profile. It's very beautiful, but it's difficult to mount solar panels on. And we also, as we sit on the naval base, we have to make sure the naval base's infrastructure could support the energy that we would be producing. It's an incredibly slow process. We have to work really hard to understand the systems that we use, the control systems, HVAC systems. And that includes, at the moment, a lot of talk with our in-house team, but also exterior experts, experts in HVAC systems. And we also, as a small museum, we have to fundraise to be able to talk to these people. But we're starting to understand the limitations of our system. But unfortunately, we have to work with many partners as we rent the land that we sit in. We have to work with BAE and the Property Trust, which work for the naval base. And also, we would like to be able to monitor the impact of changes. So introducing them one at a time is a way that we like to do it, but we would, you know, it was a slow way to do things, but we are by nature quite cautious on the effect on our objects. And decisions on policy changes, such as the environmental parameters in our showcase, involve lots of discussions with and up to our executive team. And quantifying the impact that we're having is complicated and takes a lot of time. But the Mary Rose Trust is committed to reducing its environmental impact. Acute stresses due to the coronavirus pandemic have made a move towards financial sustainability even more important as well. I think for me personally, our next steps to improve sustainability and heritage involve networking, and I feel very strongly that sharing very deeply practical information about how we're achieving this is vital. So I wrote this presentation to share some quite prosaic steps that we've taken in order that others can possibly do the same. And if you have any questions for me, please just put them in the chat. I think also it'd be great to involve other sectors, because there are other people doing this kind of thing. And it would be great to hear what they're up to. But thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Sarah. You stressed out a challenging situation that sadly lots of cultural institutions are facing today, also because of the pandemic and climate change, but still you were able to react and initiate an energy saving strategy, a sustainable strategy, which hopefully will help your institutions, but also other institutions deal with today's challenge. So thank you very much. I will now give the word to Annelies, Cosaert, Helen Wilson, and Peter Whitehead. So the next presentation sheds light on European, UK, and Oceanian initiatives for sustainable management of collections environment. We will hear from three presenters: Annelies Cosaert from the Sustainability Unit of the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage in Belgium, Helen Wilson, heritage scientist and preventive conservator at the National Archives in the UK, and Peter Whitehead, collections care leader at the National Library of New Zealand. Please go ahead, you three.
I'll now start sharing my screen, share the video. Can everyone see it? Yes.
Hello, everybody from Belgium, Brussels. I'm Annelies and I work at the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage, Kikirpa in Belgium. Today I'm going to do a quick overview of our Climate.to.Preserve project, which is led by our sustainability unit, of which I am part. So why do we do this? I think everybody knows guidelines are changing, HVAC systems are very big investments, and there are guides to do energy reduction, but there is still a need for more practical and comprehensive resources. So what we do is we look at building systems budget, and we focus on interdisciplinary collaboration. So we mostly work with facilities and collections together, but we have a long list of partners throughout this process. We really value interdisciplinary collaboration because it it allows you to integrate it in a very wide way throughout all departments of an institution. It also allows you, so the protocol that we are making will allow you to focus on short or long-term solutions, or both, starting with short-term and then going on to longer-term solutions. The end of the short-term solutions is really an implementation of all the measures and then a test to see if performance indicators are met. Long-term solutions are really there to list some building requirements or whatever requirements you need to implement bigger change. We do this in 3 museums that are quite different. So there's the Royal Museum of Fine Arts, a very large classic federal institution with classic collection. The Weirds Museum, which is a historical building and a protected historical building without much climate control, and the Belgian Film Archive Cinematheque, which is a depot area. I would quickly still like to thank our partners Geert, Claude and Sébastien from the University of Liège and the University of Leuven, and all of our other partners.
Hello from the National Archives UK. The National Archives is the UK government's official archive with 16 repositories storing over 168 linear kilometres of physical documents. Effective management of our repository environments is made possible through our building management system and air handling units. This is one of our greatest sources of carbon emissions and energy consumption. 15 years ago, there was a need to significantly decrease energy usage and carbon emissions at the National Archives UK. As a result, we adapted our building and process, introducing new evidence-based strategies and equipment that have reduced our greenhouse gas emissions by over 80% since 2010, and which provided evidence that was instrumental in the development of new building industry standards, specifically PAS 198, PD 5454 and its successor BS 4971. But how did we decide upon these changes? We questioned the status quo. At the time, this was to run air handling units 24/7 in order to maintain constant temperature and relative humidity set points throughout the year. So we asked ourselves, could we turn off the air handling units for short periods of time without risking the preservation of the collection? The answer was that we didn't know. At the time, there was no evidence, tools or frameworks available to support this action. So we gathered the evidence. Essential in this was the collaboration between our Estates and Facilities Department and Collection Care Department, as well as a method of monitoring the environment of the repositories that was independent of the building management system sensors. We took a slow, methodical approach, moving from small to larger scale experiments to ensure the safety of the documents throughout. And ultimately, we undertook collaborative research with University College London using computer modelling to predict the efficacy of various energy-saving methods in our repositories. As a result, we powered down equipment overnight and on non-working days and implemented seasonal drift, a strategy that permits the repository's environmental conditions to drift within seasonally adjusted set points throughout the year. Along with strategic equipment upgrades, these contributed greatly to our 80% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions since 2010, and they're still in use today. While proud of these achievements, we are not complacent. We continue to strive for increasingly ambitious targets in order to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, if not earlier. How are we doing this? Through continuing to gather evidence through research and using sustainability as a key driver in decisions around equipment upgrades. Crucially, we collaborate widely throughout, most recently demonstrated through our partnership with ICROM's Our Collections Matter initiative. Thank you.
Kia ora, and hello from the National Library of New Zealand. The National Library of New Zealand, which includes the Alexander Turnbull Library, holds New Zealand's national documentary heritage collections. Collections stored across 7 specialist repositories have for many years now received conditioned air 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and are maintained at stringent temperature and humidity levels as part of the preservation strategy to preserve and protect the collections in perpetuity. A project in 2010 improved the efficiency of the systems, including upgrading the plant and insulation, but did not review environmental requirements, which were based on strict set points and parameters. The results have been impressive-looking data, showing very stable and excellent preservation environments. However, we now estimate that this accounts for up to 80% of the National Library energy use and costs. So, in 2020, the Library's Collection Care Department started working with the facilities team to review our systems with a view to a more sustainable approach to collection storage. This coincided with planning elsewhere in the department for large-scale capital projects to upgrade existing facilities, for new building projects for heritage collections, and recently with new government objectives for a carbon-neutral New Zealand. This has given us better access to engineers and other building specialists. In the absence of any guidelines giving us the answers specific to our New Zealand context, we looked for existing tools such as the Image Permanence Institute's methodology for implementing sustainable energy saving strategies and began adapting them to account for our local temperate climate. There are 3 streams to this work. First is understanding our preservation objectives, investigating life expectancy and interpreting what preserve in perpetuity actually means and how controlled environments contribute to those goals. Second is collaborating with our facilities team and the engineers, exploring how our building and systems can be adapted to be more sustainable, with engineers now gathering more information on the systems and how they operate to help us make the decisions and plan for shutdowns. And thirdly, redefining our preservation requirements as the Library and other New Zealand heritage sector organisations plan and build new collection repositories. While this includes aiming for more passive buildings, it also incorporates broader sustainability strategies which encompass social and economic as well as environmental sustainability. This is the very beginning of our journey, a work in progress, and we look forward to sharing more detail in the months and years to come. Thank you very much.
This presentation has shown 3 different initiatives happening in specific contexts, but still they are striving towards the same objective, reducing the energy consumption of their facilities. If you have questions for Peter or Helen, they are not here today, but just put them in the chat and I will forward them to forward the questions to them. Thank you. So the next and final presenter is Dr. Iris Kramer. She is pioneering the application of artificial intelligence in archaeology. Iris did her PhD in computer science on the use of deep learning to detect archaeological sites on Earth observation data. Early 2020, she founded Archive, a startup that is de-risking land development by automatically detecting georisks, including archaeology. So Iris, the floor is yours, and I believe you will present your presentation in the format of a video. Yeah.
I will start sharing my screen then.
Hello everyone, my name is Iris Kramer and I am the founder and CEO of Archaeological, and we use AI to automatically detect archaeological sites, and we see a lot of potential to also be able to monitor potential sites for damages. And we are going to present this presentation today, specifically focusing on how we can cut carbon emissions in these practices. So carbon emissions archaeology are created by detecting, preserving, and monitoring sites, because we need geophysics, field walking, trial trenching, and excavations to do all these things. And those require long drives to often very remote locations. And there is a need for specialist equipment, including airplanes to then look out for archaeological sites and diggers to eventually dig it up in an excavation. And then in the UK and large parts of the world, archaeology is a requirement before any development takes place on a construction site. And archaeology in the process, in the planning cycle, is not considered at the earliest stages because it's not advantageous for the construction company to do so. And so oftentimes the developers find out at the environmental impact assessment stage that this specific location is actually not viable for construction because there's archaeology there. Or they can do it, but the whole plan requires more time and effort for excavation or further research with geophysics and field walking, trial trenching, and then excavation. So it's all quite a long process. Planning permission in the UK can take up to 7 years on average today. And there is a lot of waste and delays conclude in waste and also then in carbon emissions. Especially because archaeology is still an unknown, and those can delays and waste and such. So what we think should be used more of is Earth observation data. So one of the ways is with aerial and satellite imagery. It's been done for very long from an airplane, fixed wing airplane, and then with a photographer out of the plane looking at, for example, earthworks that are showing up as slight elevation differences with the low-lying sun, revealing some shadows. Or with crop marks, detecting crop stress from a wall or a ditch where the crop grows differently over those locations. And then finally, more recently, since 2000, we can use LiDAR data. In the UK, this is available for the whole country at high resolution, and we can see underneath forest canopies, and they reveal these earthworks that we previously could only detect at this specific time of day by looking at these shadows. So that's really exciting data that we can be using. And even more exciting to me, of course, is that we can automate the process of discovering archaeological sites. And so one of the ways is with deep neural networks. So the way that works is that we input known site locations with a polygon around it, and the Earth observation data, like on the left of the image. Then in the AI training, the network sees all these examples and needs to come up with the desired output. So internally, it learns lines and edges, filters that it needs to find those patterns without us telling it to look for circles. It internally knows and learns that it needs circles to find the right solution. So that's called training the AI. And so it's worked really well for us already, where we have been able to detect lots of different archaeological sites in the UK with high accuracy, and it works across the country. And ways that we are reducing carbon emissions is by using existing resources. So we are not flying our own planes or drones. We're using data that is already out there, and therefore that's the most carbon efficient approach to doing it. And then in construction, we are developing instant assessments that are available at the earliest planning stages. And because we can do this cost effectively, it is really valuable and worth it for the developers to include something like this in their planning process. And then having those locations is really useful for developers as well if they do pursue a planning permission on a site where there is known archaeology, because they can then immediately go to the excavation stage and skip some of the previous stages that are needed to get a good understanding of what archaeology is there, if we know through automation where the archaeological sites are. So that's our pitch for the company. We can have high accuracy at early stages with instant assessments, and it's especially valuable at really large areas. So for example, for route design, if there is a new train line to be built, where do you put that one? You can use our technology to quickly get maybe the most efficient or like cost-effective route, for example. So we are a team of 2 at the moment, and we've been working on this for 2 years now, and we have got customers, including the Forestry Commission and the National Trust, and we've been supported, lucky enough to be supported by European Space Agency and various other grant bodies. So we've done some experiments on satellite imagery, but our biggest drawback so far is that in the UK, we've got a lot of clouds, and so that makes it really difficult to use this technology. Then also, crop stress on different kind of crops shows differently. So there's a lot of variation that we need the AI to learn. So we've got a long way to go, but this year we have been admitted into the European Space Agency Business Incubation Center. And so with them, I think we have the right kind of help to create this kind of technologies. So somewhere that there aren't that many clouds are these arid countries. And in those locations, satellite imagery is an extremely valuable tool because unfortunately there is a risk of looting and illegal construction in places. And technologies that have been used by these 2 specific case studies is synthetic aperture radar, which is very sensitive to the textures of the soil and can detect these kind of changes in the landscape. And it has been also, automation has also been used not on satellite imagery, but on drones to detect potsherds with a low flying drone over an area, using photogrammetry to create the whole location and then finding and detecting these potsherds on it, which is a really clever approach. And then also you can use it to automate automate map digitization of historical maps, which again, historical maps are out there and are a really valuable source for us to understand where sites are. Then finally, you can also use satellite imagery to monitor at-risk heritage, and that has already been done by many different case studies in a manual approach. For example, this case study by Jessica Sana, looking for these looting pits across a really large area. And on large scales, there's really the opportunity to reveal and understand the patterns of timing, severity, and location of these damages. And it's not just looting that we need to use monitoring for, also to monitor the effects of climate change, for example, on erosion of sites, and then also for illegal construction that I said earlier. But there hasn't been so much research into automation or any really of site monitoring, and I really think that we can start looking forward to a future where we can actually automate this. We can have an automated approach that maybe gives us a weekly or maybe even a daily or an hourly update of a satellite image over a location that we care about. And then if there is any illegal activity going on, then a local heritage manager or potentially with the police can go out there and stop the looting from happening. So I think that it's a very realistic future to look forward to, maybe not hourly, but definitely on a continual basis, that we can be alerted to the damages that might occur on archaeological sites. And there's so much potential there, but there have not been so many case studies. So we are really looking for collaborations. We have the automated approaches that we've developed, and we would really like to apply them to large data sets. So if anyone wants to collaborate on a project like this, then we are really keen to do so. So in the summary, we can use our technologies to cut carbon emissions by using Earth observation data that is already available, by reducing site visits and reducing manual labor that is included in this. And also early stages of construction, making our automation available there also protects heritage and avoid delays and waste. So thank you very much for listening, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, Iris. You are developing solutions that are win-win. either for archaeologists, construction company, and the society to which this heritage belongs, using a growing field, artificial intelligence. So I'm happy to discover that there are some applications for this sector using AI, but still it is a field that has to be explored. So thank you. We will now wrap up the session, Terry and I. It is with great hope that we have seen sustainable initiatives growing everywhere. Is the response wide and fast enough? Probably not. But all the panelists in this session, in this conference, they have shown that something is happening. Citizen groups, activists, scientists, artists, some politics, they are also speaking up and acting. We must all continue to do our part and act together. If we can do that, I believe that we will succeed in a way. And now, Terry, I will give you the last word.
Thank you, Estelle, for pulling together those issues that have been brought out by the panelists. And I do want to conclude just by thanking our audience for dedicating 1 hour of their time today to this important topic of the heritage sector and carbon emissions. I want to thank our panelists for squeezing so many ideas and thoughts into 10-minute presentations. And I want to thank the Climate.Culture.Peace team that's been leading and supporting all of our efforts. And of course, thank ICROM and the British Council for putting together this forum, creating a forum to deal with this topic. So with that, thanks again, thanks to everybody, and wishing you a good day. This is the last day of the conference, and I hope you will be able to enjoy other segments. Thanks, goodbye.